Hello and welcome to the Jerich Show. Yes, we are back. I've been transformed back from the rock that I was last week into a living, breathing, talking human being, much to Eric's dismay. But yes, I'm Javvad Malik. Alongside me, as always, is the handsome, the lovable, the charming, the huggable Eric Crone. How you doing, Eric?
I'm doing pretty good, but that was quite the intro. So I'm waiting for the shoe to drop here.
We all are. We all are.
Yeah. Well, welcome back, Javvad. It was great. Hopefully, your input will be better than that of the Rock, which replaced you last week. But I have a feeling it will be. So, what do we got? What do we got to talk about today?
What have we got to talk about today? I think we've got some talks about Intel going on today. You found this story, so why don't you talk us through it? Let me pull it up. There it is, ZDNet.
Yeah, I thought this was pretty interesting. Intel, they're calling it a breach of 20 gigs of data, but here's what's important to understand. This wasn't like they were hacked. It's not like somebody got into the system and pulled it out. It looks like it's an abuse of an actual usable or acceptable use type of portal, right? Where they share information with vendors, they share information with other folks. And so what happened is somebody who probably had legitimate access to this downloaded about 20 gigs worth of files and then dumped it out to a researcher who then posted it out in the public. Well, this kind of drives back home to some of my experience that I have back in the day. I used to work at a place, we did manufacturing, right? So we built aerospace sorts of things. And as a vendor, we actually had to deal a lot with intellectual property for other people. We're building these components and these parts. This is somebody else's research, and they put time and effort, sometimes thousands of dollars or even more into building these things, into building the intellectual property, doing the research and development piece. And now if a competitor or let's say a nation state jumps out and grabs this information, they can now build these things for far less than you have invested in it and undercut you. And we see this at lots of different levels. As a matter of fact, I know just coming to mind here, there was a Chinese version of, I think it's the F-22, that they basically ripped off our stuff and built this thing for next to nothing compared to what we had to put into it. So what are your thoughts on that, Javvad?
I think it opens up a whole can of worms. And I suppose if we take it back, if we take the non-American approach and don't dramatize it so much as you like to do, if we just peel it back to the original, I suppose, underlying issue is you share documents with trusted partners, employees, and everything. They might take the information. And, this is why we set up, like in M&A situations, it's really quite sensitive. So that's why dedicated war rooms are set up with a lot of logging, and, you vet who has access to it, and it contains a lot of sensitive information. So that's fine for a war room type scenario. But this is like sharing stuff with trusted partners. And there's no real amount of vetting you can do, because you just don't know what someone's going to do with that information. So I suppose there are some technical controls. You can start putting in some DLP type controls, some classification markings on the documentation. So the technology is there. So there is that. But there's also the fact that some people are just opportunistic, or they're just curious. They see, hey, there's 50 gigs of data here, 10 gigs of data, whatever it is. Let's just download it. It's a bit like people that when torrents were really popular back in the day, or uTorrent and all these apps and Napster when they came out, people were downloading like hundreds and thousands of songs and movies. They might never have listened or watched them ever, but the fact that it was available, let's just download it. So I think there's an element of that as well. So putting in place some technical controls, but also having some architecture choice built in that actually prevents people from doing it is kind of a good idea as well. So you create that kind of culture where it's like, hey, why are you doing this? Why do you actually need it? And keeping things to a minimum.
Well, and you're going to have to accept some risk with this. And I got to say, I mean, Intel, it's not their fault. They didn't do anything wrong here. And what I really like about this is when you read the story, they were very quickly able to pull it back to that portal and say, this is the source of these documents, because some of them were marked as such. And it made me think of, technical controls where you might even be able to go on very sensitive sort of things. You might even go to the point that as the document is being downloaded or something like that, you can tag it to where you could later come back and see exactly who and when did it. And I have no doubt they're going to be looking at the logs here. 20 gigs of data is a decent amount of data, especially in text and PDFs. So I'm sure they're going to be able to look back at this and go, hey, there was an excessive amount of downloads in this area, right? It's kind of like in an organization, if you've ever dealt with salespeople, one of the big things you have on the way out the door is sometimes they'll try to grab the customer list. And I've seen this happen myself. And so you end up looking at, hey, we got a big query for a lot of downloaded data that's abnormal here. We're going to stop that. We're going to disallow that for this, for this time, because that's unusual. Those sorts of things can be very powerful in trying to do this. But I got to give Intel kudos, man. They were right away. This story broke and boom, they're like, then this is where it came from. And so they belayed any rumors that it could be a hack and that, all of this stuff is going out that way. And kudos to them for being able to handle that very quickly.
Yeah. You mentioned salespeople taking customer lists, and a former company I used to work for, not my most recent one, but what they done is cleverly they added some honey accounts into their Salesforce. So they were fake accounts. They weren't real customers. They looked like real customers, and they had a separate email account set up for it, which didn't tie it back to the company. And one point, a salesperson left, and they did take the entire sales list. And they went through blast emailing them saying, hey, this, that, the other. So as soon as they got an email come through on that email address saying, we understand you're a customer, or, you might be in the market, that immediately triggered their, who's done it? And then lo and behold, it was a salesperson who recently left, and they went to work for that company. And in that case, they were actually successfully able to press legal charges against him.
Excellent.
So even simple things like adding like honey tokens or watermarking things can go a long way.
Yep, absolutely. Now, there's another place where this kind of happens here in Javvad. I think you have a story that's related to this sort of information loss and what it can do. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
Yes, with us in the UK having Mr. Beans in charge of the government, it's no surprise to see things leaking and data going wonky. So there's been some information leaked, some documentation. There's some investigations going on. So there's a lot of we can neither confirm nor deny stuff. But what's really interesting is that it basically boils down to there was a spear phishing attack, and bad guys got hold of credentials, and they were able to access emails. And within the emails, there are lots of sensitive documentation and information. So that's what happened. You can see, Fox's email account hacked was so-called using, can you see that spear phishing message, which tricks a target into handing over their password and login details. And we saw this happen in Twitter not too long ago, where it was a social engineering attack. They found out pretending to be an employee, and they managed to get credentials. So, it's not to say this is like easy to mitigate or, no one fall for it. I think everyone or most people at some point in time, they've either fallen for one or they've been very, very close to falling for such a scam. So it's not that it's the issue, but there are lots of things we can do to put in place. Simple things like multi-factor authentication can go a long way in preventing at least a lot of your casual phishing attempts. Having separation controls, or even having that culture where like don't use standard non-encrypted email for sensitive communications. Put in place better tools in, or other communication mechanisms. But having said that, the UK government, a lot of them had their own WhatsApp groups a while ago, and that came to light that they were discussing government information on that. So I think it's like, obviously there's the social engineering element for the attack purposes, but there's also a lack of appropriate use of tools, or giving away too much information. I think even with a Twitter hack, people suddenly got the realization, oh, what if all of our DMs are exposed? What if this? And there was a lot of people really worried, like politicians or celebrities and what have you. And then like, well, Twitter is not the place to be making like deals. It's not the place to be exchanging contracts or be discussing sensitive information. You use better tools for that kind of stuff. Or
law firms in New York that obviously won't lose a bunch of data, right? That's what you should use for that. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I mean, where do you do your business? Now, I came out of the Department of Defense a while back. I was a contractor for the U.S. Army for like 10 years. And one of the great things we had going there was actually the fact that we used digitally signed and encrypted messages within the organization. And it made it very easy to see if somebody wants to try to bypass something and it's not digitally signed, you're automatically suspect. You're just like, yeah, no, not believing anything in this. And it did give us the opportunity to encrypt. And frankly, this was all stuff built into Microsoft. We used Active Directory as a back end and their smart cards. And it worked really, really well. These tools are actually out there to do that. It's just something that not a lot of people think to deploy. And in many cases, it's not worth the effort, I suppose. It is interesting to see that being a credential fish. And, I'm picturing the usual, hey, go over here to log in to read this message and the username, password. And you're right. MFA helps a lot. But there are ways around that, as we all know. But you're right. It's the casual stuff, right? I do think it's interesting too. And I want to throw this out there. This is totally a rabbit hole, but the Twitter thing, right? So the kid ended up on trial here in Tampa, which is about where I work. And during that hearing with the judge, they had the Zoom meeting not password protected and allowed other people to share their screens. So they're now having hearing for a hacker and they're allowing that to happen, right? Yeah. What do you think is going to happen to this, right? So there was all kinds of adult-oriented stuff going on that started popping up because people would share it on their screens, and they were dropping like music and all kinds of just distracting stuff. And I saw the judge was like, oh, I didn't want to have to do this, but I guess we're going to have to password protect this. Mm-hmm. Why would you not password protect a hearing for people, right? I just, it blows my mind to see that, or at the very least, limit the ability for other people to be able to pop on cameras and stuff like that just by default, right? So, sorry to go down that little rabbit hole, but I just blew my mind to see that, and it just shakes my head. I'm shaking my head, going, "Wow,
that's so funny." It reminds me of the A-Team series. Do you remember that growing up?
There were 10,000 shots fired and nothing hit.
Yeah, right? But the best thing about it is that they were highly trained commandos and what have you. And whenever the bad guys caught them, they'd lock them in a facility that had loads of like spare parts lying around, which they could construct and build a tank out of or something.
Blow torches, scrap metal, grinders.
And that's the same thing over here. I mean, it's bizarre because if you remember in our colleague Kevin Mitnick's book, where he talks about when he got arrested, and in court, a lot of the staff had their name badges turned the other way around because they didn't want him seeing their name, because they were so scared that he's going to do something to them and he's going to whistle some launch codes and they're going to drop nukes on their house and what have you. So there was, and both of these are such extremes. It's like on one hand you got excessive paranoia, which isn't the right way, but you can't just be so lax with these things. And I've seen so many people again like blaming Zoom for this and what have you, and it's not a Zoom issue. It's not setting it up correctly.
Yeah,
so, you can't stop that. I mean, if you allow anything to be open and not password protected, then you really can't blame people for taking advantage of that.
No, absolutely not. And you would think, I mean, with the COVID thing going on, we would have all learned some lessons about Zoom by now. But apparently nobody thought this through on that one. And so it was kind of interesting. And it was one of those things, I just shook my head when I saw it. I was like, no, yeah. how could you have not seen this coming, right? Not one of those, oh, you never could have seen this coming, but how could you have not seen this coming?
Yeah.
So I guess it's just, we're in that different mindset or whatever. But hey, maybe we should consult for them in the future, right? Big money in consulting, I hear.
Exactly. So on that note, I think we can wrap up there. To all of our people who are back following us, thank you for joining us. And I love it when a plan comes together.
Absolutely. Oh, I love those guys. It's been too long.
Still wanted by the government. They survive as soldiers of fortune. If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the A-Team.
Brings back so many memories.
Oh yeah, looks like another day at work.